Hi, everyone. How are you all doing? Good? So I had a pre-planned introduction for our next speaker, but something happened about 15 minutes ago that really moved me, and so I wanted to share it with you. I'm the chair of the Masters in Branding program at the School of Visual Arts in New York City, and every year we come to the conference with our entire student body, so we have 27 students here. And they're about 2 months away from their graduation, and in the final weeks of the program, they work on a project that we call the 100-Day Project, which we hijacked from Michael Beirut, because the students have to do something every day for 100 days, enact some sort of creative endeavor. And some of you might have been bombarded with some of the students because they've become quite confident in their own pitching abilities. But in any case, Serbi Rathi is one of my students, and she happened to ask Dorie Clark, our next speaker, a question for her 100-day project. Her 100-day project is deconstructing notions of abundance. And she has been asking people, what is the one thing that they feel is most important? What is the richness in their lives? What is the thing that they feel is the most important thing to have, that they need abundantly? And Dorie, without missing a beat, now Dorie's like a super serious businesswoman, like teacher, professor, New York best-selling author. She looked at Serbi and she said, "There's only one answer." And I was like, "What is it? What is it?" She said, "Love. Love. Love is all we need." And maybe a good business consultant like Dorie. But let me tell you about Dorie. So first of all, she wrote a book that changed my life. She wrote a book called Reinventing You, Define Your Brand, Imagine Your Future. And I read this long before I ever met her. And so when I met her, I was super fangirl. And now to be able to introduce her to you here at the Howe Conference is a real thrill for me. So she's a professor and a professional speaker at Duke University's Fuqua School of Business. She's most proud of the book she's written and being a mom to 2 handsome adopted cats. At the moment, she's most excited about having just purchased a condominium in New York City, where she's been living and renting for 4 years. So she's going to be on stage now to talk about building your brand as a creative professional. Please join me in welcoming my new friend, Dorie Clark.
Debbie's my pal, so she knows the truth. I'm actually really mushy. So when it comes to our brands, we live in a world where it's increasingly challenging to be able to even reach people to begin with, to get the word out about who we are. A study by the Radicati Group said that the average professional sends or receives 122 email messages per day. And a study by the Atlassian Group showed that the average professional attends 62 meetings per month. If you think about that, that's 62 per month. It comes out, though, to about 2 or 3 for every business day, which is probably about right. Now, we think about the work that we actually have to do, the work that we're paid to do, and somehow we have to fit that in between those 122 emails and in between those 62 meetings. And there is precious little time for anything else. And what it leaves us is feeling like this, constantly pressured, constantly frenzied. But the corollary of that is it's not just us that's feeling that way. It's everyone else. And when folks are pushed to their limits, trying to get everything done that they need to, the last thing that they have the time or the mental bandwidth for is thinking about you and about your brand and about your career arc. And oh, let me see. I wonder where she really is going in her career. How could I help her get there? Even if that's your boss, they probably don't have the time to really think about that in a thorough and thoughtful way. And so it's incumbent upon us to take responsibility. Somehow, we have to find a way to communicate effectively, not like a self-promoting jerk, but just as an effective person. How do we break through that noise so that other people understand who we are today and where we're headed and what we are capable of? That's really the question. And so I wanted to start out the talk by just sharing with you a little bit about how I came to be interested in this topic to begin with. The story actually starts probably about a quarter of a mile down the road, not very far at all. I know people come to How nationally and internationally, but if some of you guys are from the Boston area, you may recognize this. This is the front page of the Boston Phoenix, which until relatively recently was Boston's alternative news weekly. It was sort of the village voice of Boston, which over a nearly 40-year period launched the illustrious journalism careers of some of America's top journalists. Now, I worked for the Phoenix, but I was sadly not one of them because I ended up getting laid off. This is the very first time, this cover story was the very first time that I ever made it onto the cover of the Phoenix, and I was so excited. I saved about 20 of these. You can see it's not above the fold. In fact, my name is cut off here, but it was right there. That was me. The Phoenix was an amazing paper. We covered all the most important issues of the day. In fact, for those of you with good eyes, you can even see some of the important issues that we spent our time covering. That was good stuff. But sadly, one day I got called into the HR office, and I thought they were going to change our dental plan. I thought they were going to just have me sign some paperwork. I did not yet know in my very first job out of grad school what it means to be called into the HR office. And so I left that afternoon without a job, which was pretty dispiriting for your first job. But I went home and I said, all right, you know, this is a setback, but I can do it. You know, I'll just get back out there tomorrow and I'll start looking for a job. And so I was all ready to go out and pound the pavement the next day. But the only problem was that the next morning, I turned on the news, started to make breakfast, and I realized it was not going to be the day that I started looking for a job. Because the day they chose to lay me off was Monday, September 10th, 2001. Me not having a job was the least of anybody's problems that next day. And it was then that I began to realize, first of all, the precariousness of what many people might consider a safe, stable job. I mean, nowadays you say, oh, I was a journalist, I got laid off. People say, well, duh, what do you expect? But at the time, this was not a thing, right? Between 2000 and 2015, 40% of American journalists lost their jobs. We wonder about fake news. Maybe it's because we don't have any journalists anymore. Yeah, right? So, but in 2001, when I was laid off, it was really rare. So I was genuinely surprised by all of this. And so, fortunately, I was able to figure it out. It was not easy. I was a freelance writer for a while, just kind of cobbling stories together. I had been a political reporter, and so when I couldn't land another job in journalism, I ultimately switched over and started working in politics. So I became a spokesperson on a governor's race here in Massachusetts, and eventually for the 2004 cycle, I became a spokesperson for a presidential race. So I was doing cool things. I was reinventing. But what I learned along the way is that other people's perceptions of you don't change as fast as we change. I would run into people that I hadn't seen for, a few months, a year, and they were always happy to see me. But they would ask me questions and say, oh, how's the writing going? How are things at the paper? They had no idea I'd been let go. And of course, I assumed that people were following or keeping up, but the truth was they weren't. They couldn't because they were just too busy. And it's not their fault, right? It's not people's responsibility to keep up with what's going on in everyone's lives, but somehow we have to find a way to break through and get them to take notice. And this is especially true. In my case, it was very stark because I was changing jobs, changing careers all through my 20s, trying to figure out what I what I was going to do. I ran a bicycling advocacy nonprofit. I did all the things, right? Eventually, 12 years ago, I settled into what I'm doing now with writing and speaking and teaching and consulting. But during that period, I realized that people weren't necessarily keeping up with what I was doing. But it is more subtle, but more insidious. If you have been working at your company for a long time, odds are most people have not taken the time to reevaluate their perception of you in many years. You might think, oh, of course they're aware that I've been taking these classes, or that I want to move in this new direction, or that I picked up these new skills. Meanwhile, people are saying, oh, she's such a cute, enthusiastic person. Oh, she's so wonderful. And that's because you started as an intern and now you're 37. We have to take control. So how do we do it? Well, one of the big problems in all of this, and I think that Marta's presentation kind of touched on this a little bit, is that sometimes even the phrase personal brand sounds a little icky to people. Kind of gets their back up, especially perhaps for folks in the creative world, because it sounds like the connotation is that in some ways you have to sell yourself. You have to turn yourself into something that you're not. You have to make yourself like this guy. And I want to be very clear, that is not what I am talking about. This guy, have my card, that is personal branding done badly. No one likes that. No one wants that. What I am talking about, in fact, is the opposite. It is not judging what the rest of the world wants you to be and then pretending to be more like that. It is instead a process that starts with self-knowledge. And then we ask ourselves, once we understand what is unique about us, what is unique about our contribution, we begin to figure out how we can make other people get it, how we can make them understand why we have something to contribute, so that we'll be able to do that. But to get at this, to kind of crack the puzzle, I wanted to go back in time for a minute to the invention of the term personal brand. This is a cover story from Fast Company magazine from 1997, 21 years ago. It was written by Tom Peters. Some of you guys may be familiar with him. He's a well-known management guru. And it was called The Brand Called You. Now, the truth is, personal brand, the term, was coined then, right? It's a 20-year-old term. But the concept, what we are really talking about when we talk about personal brand, is something that's been around for millennia. It is something that has been around since the beginning of time. And that is personal brand. It's a modern coinage, but it is nothing more and nothing less than a synonym for your reputation. And that matters. When we frame it like that, we understand it matters what your reputation is. In the end, that's actually the only asset. What do people say about you when you leave the room? And is it what you would wish that they would say? So fundamentally, you're here because you are creative professionals. You want to make a difference with your ideas. You have something you want to put out into the world. And so what I'd like to talk with you guys about today is about how we can do that better, how we can do that more effectively. And in order to do that, one of the things we need to lay on the table is that absolutely, creative ideas, innovative ideas, they matter. That is important. That is your stock in trade. But it's also not just about the idea. You can probably think of a million people that are smart, creative, brilliant, and yet they can't really seem to get it over the finish line. They can't really seem to get their ideas actualized. How do we make it real? That's the question. It's about making it happen. That's what success is seeing something come to fruition. So what does that involve? Well, I wrote a book 3 years ago now. It's called Stand Out. I was honored actually that Inc. named it the #1 leadership book of 2015. But the subtitle of it is How to Find Your Breakthrough Idea and Build Your Following Around It. And that is what I want to talk with you guys about today, because it's both, right? We understand, designers understand more than anyone, it is a synthesis. It's having the idea, and then it's also spreading the idea. So when it comes to the ways to spark these ideas, and many of you guys are probably already doing parts of this, but I wanted to underline some of the things that I've discovered in my research that I thought might be particularly apt for you. How do we develop innovative ideas? Well, one of the people that I turned to in my quest to understand that, somebody I interviewed for Standout, was this gentleman. His name is David Allen. And David is, you might be familiar with his work. He is the author of the mega best-selling blockbuster, Getting Things Done. Sold more than 2 million copies. He's a productivity expert. And when I interviewed him about how he believes the best ideas can come to fruition and really take root, he told me something that I thought was very interesting. He said, when it comes to having a breakthrough idea, it doesn't take time. What it takes is space. And it's almost like a Zen koan. But if you peel it back, what he's talking about is something that I think is quite apt in our modern society. We think about the emails, we think about the meetings. So often, even when we are trying to be creative, even when we are trying to come up with our best ideas, we're not really there. We're not really present because we're being pulled in so many directions by the exigencies of modern life, by the demands, these micro demands pulling at us. Now, some of you guys are probably familiar with the essay by Paul Graham, Manager's Schedule and Maker's Schedule. This is something that I personally try to live my life by in terms of dividing up my time so that I have blocks of so-called maker time, time that is protected and uninterrupted. We can't, in general, maybe some of you can, and God bless you, but mostly it is very difficult to have true creative breakthroughs if everything in our lives are scheduled on half-hour increments. How do we give ourselves the space? Now, it doesn't necessarily mean, we know everyone's busy. It doesn't necessarily mean having more time or pushing back on things that you can't push back on. But it does mean that if we can cluster activities so that we can create blocks where we have more room to breathe and let those ideas breathe, if we're able to reset ourselves, small things, going outside, taking a walk after lunch, adhering to what the researcher Tony Schwartz calls managing your energy, not your time, being aware of your circadian rhythms and when you're able to do your best work, that enables you to create the space necessary for those creative ideas, those breakthrough ideas. Now, another way to access the best ideas and information, as you guys know, is being able to tap into the wisdom of unexpected sources. Now, in the business world and also in the design world, there's a lot of emphasis on the concept of mentorship. And mentorship is amazing. I mean, certainly, who wouldn't want to have someone in their life that's a seasoned professional that takes you under their wing and shows you all the mistakes that you can avoid to save you the time, to help shepherd your career along? That would be amazing. The only problem, though, is that most of us don't have people like that. Wouldn't it be great? But the people that everyone wants as mentors, guess what? Everyone else wants them as mentors too. There's a shortage at the top. So what do we do? Well, in my book, Reinventing You, the one that Debbie mentioned, I profiled this woman. She's actually a bit of a local celebrity here in Boston. Her name is Hank Philippi Ryan. And for 30 plus years, she has been a newscaster for Channel 7. She has her own program called Hank Investigates. And Hank, in the last decade or so, has actually reinvented herself. She still has her day job at Channel 7, but in addition to that, she has become a well-known mystery writer. She's written more than half a dozen mystery novels, including ones that have won the McCavity Award, the Agatha Award, all the big awards in the field. And how did she start doing that? Well, it turns out I asked her about it, and the reason that she started writing mystery novels was because of her intern. She told me that there was a young woman who had worked for her as her intern, and she had gotten to be, good friends with this woman, and actually years later, the young woman came back and took a full-time job as her producer once she had gotten enough experience to be able to do that. And so they had stayed good friends. And the young woman had a hobby of fiction writing. And one day she asked Hank, hey, I'm trying to get this novel published. Would you mind reading it and providing some feedback? And Hank said, oh, of course. She was happy to do this favor for her friend. But she takes it home, she brings it home over the weekend, and she starts flipping through it, and she told me, when I interviewed her, she said, it's like that Zen saying, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. Because in that moment, she realized it hit her. She had always wanted to write a book too. She just never made the time. She just never thought it was really possible or really something she could do. But when she saw that her intern had done it, she realized she could too, and has started an incredibly fulfilling and lauded second career as a writer as a result. And so, to Hank's point, to Hank's example, something that I advocate for in Reinventing You and elsewhere is creating what I call a mentor board of directors. We don't need anymore to be constrained by waiting for this one magic person, this deus machina, to come to us and rescue us. Instead, what I would encourage all of us to do is to proactively think about and seek out the people in your life. They could be senior, they could be your peers, they could even be junior professionals, your interns, your students. And you don't have to look for somebody who embodies everything you want to be in the world. You look for traits, you look for skills that you want to learn, and you say, who does that really well? And you take them together. This doesn't have to be a formal thing. You don't even have to tell them that you're thinking of them this way. But in your head, they become your mentor board of directors. They become the people that you want to just consciously try to spend more time with and learn from and be inspired by, the way Hank was with her intern. Now, as designers, as creative professionals, you also know that when it comes to generating the best ideas, it involves new inputs, new ideas, new associations. And that can't happen if we're doing the same thing all the time, if we're talking to the same people all the time. We need to somehow break out of the rut of familiarity. But it's tricky, right? Because we're humans, we fall into patterns. That's what we do. How can we consciously try to break that open for our benefit and for other people's benefit? I'd like to propose a possible solution to you, and this is one that I write about in my book, Stand Out, and this is also a local story from here in Boston. This is actually a friend of mine. His name is Robbie Samuels, and Robbie, about 10 years ago, started a meetup group, and it was called Socializing for Justice. And the reason Robbie started this meetup group was, at the time, he was a nonprofit development professional. And he believed, as in fact many people in the development and nonprofit world do, that there was a lot that nonprofits could learn from each other if only they shared information. But mostly they didn't. Robbie would talk to other people about, oh, hey, we should get together, we should trade ideas, we should trade best practices. And they would all say, Robbie, that sounds like a great idea, but we're just too busy. We're too busy doing our own thing. We don't have time to do that, to add one more thing to the plate. And so it didn't go anywhere. But so Robbie had another idea. And he said, what could actually get people to not just agree, not just acquiesce to coming to some sort of gathering, but what could get them to want to come to a gathering? And so that's where he came up with Socializing for Justice. It was a free meetup group, and it was purely social. It was for nonprofit professionals and their friends to come have fun Every 2 weeks, they would have activities like cocktails for justice, bowling for justice, knitting for justice. And they would get together and meet people and hang out, and it was great for that. In fact, that's how Robbie met his wife. So it was a success on many, many levels. But in addition to that, Robbie wanted to be very conscious about how this group was created. Because something he discovered right away was that when he saw people who had been coming frequently, again, human nature, right? They started to kind of form a clique. Not that they were mean people, not that they were trying to exclude anyone, but it's just natural, right? You hang out with the same people, you see them, oh, they become your pals, so you spend more time with them. They were the in crowd. And so new people would come in, check out the meetings, and they would almost immediately leave because they saw that they didn't know anyone and that everyone else was just talking to each other, and they said, oh, I don't fit in here. And so Robbie implemented 2 rules for the group, 2 guiding principles, and I want to share them with you because, first of all, I think they're rather innovative. And second of all, I would actually challenge you that if you implement these in your lives, perhaps even here at How, it might be a game changer for you. The first is he created a policy called bagels versus croissants. And it was not about the breakfast foods that they ordered. What bagels versus croissants was it turned out, again, Robbie was observing the patterns of all the people gathering. If you have 3 or more people that are standing talking to each other, again, normal human behavior, what happens is that the 3 people, they all form this kind of tight circle, this kind of tight closed circle. Oh, I'm here, you're here, and we close it off. No one can get in. If you are a newcomer, if you're a stranger, are you going to go tap, 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 hey, can I break up your circle and join you? Absolutely not. And so what Robbie said is, don't stand in a bagel, don't stand in a closed circle. Instead, it's so minor, it's so simple, but be a croissant. Let's stand so that we leave room open so people can join us. Croissant, if I leave you with nothing else, remember people, croissants are inclusive. Now the second rule that he had, which is a good one, is he said if somebody had become a regular, if they had been coming multiple times in a row and had started to get to know a lot of people in his group, he said, okay, he took them aside and he said, you're a regular now. And that means that you have a special responsibility. You have to be a host. We have to adopt a host mentality. And when you are a regular, that means that for the first hour, these meetings were 2 hours long, for the first hour, you are not allowed to talk to people you already know. In the second hour, you go ahead, you do whatever you want, you talk to all your friends, you catch up with them. But in the first hour, you are a host, and you welcome the new people. Now, we so often in our lives don't do that. We don't take that agency. We don't take on the mantle of, oh, I could be a host. But if you do it, it is transformative not just for you, but for other people, and for creating the kind of welcoming, inclusive environment that, frankly, I think most of us want. It certainly helps other people feel better, feel included, and feel like it's their place. But also, I will posit, it helps you. It helps you network better, meet more people, have access to different ideas, have access to different kinds of people than you might normally gravitate to. The more we can think of ourselves as hosts, the more we can break things open and examine new possibilities. Now, we said from the beginning that having the great ideas, having access to the great ideas, is only half the battle, right? Because we also have to spread those ideas. It might mean if you work independently, if you're an entrepreneur or a freelancer, that you have to convince your client that they're great ideas. If you work in-house, you're not the only decision maker. You have to convince your colleagues, the people around you, that your ideas are solid and that they want to get behind them. So how do we do that? How do we build more influence? That's something that I want to explore with you now. And I want to share a few different strategies for you. Not all of these are things that you have to do. It's a little bit more of a smorgasbord, right? You can pick what feels right to you. But I hope that some of these might spark some actionable ideas. The first comes from this gentleman. His name is Robert Cialdini. He is an eminent, you may have heard of him, he is an eminent psychologist. He's an emeritus professor at Arizona State University, author of Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion, which for more than 30 years has been a massive bestseller and one of the definitive books in organizational psychology. When I interviewed Robert Cialdini, I used to blog for Forbes, and so I spoke with him many times for it. And in one of the articles that I wrote, he shared this strategy with me that I thought was quite interesting. You've probably run into this problem, I know I have, where you go in to meet with somebody for the first time, and you assume that they will have researched you, that they will know who you are, and instead you walk in and they say, oh, so tell me again who you are, what is it we're talking about, why are we here? And immediately you are on the defensive. Because, oh, well, let me tell you about myself and the reason we're here, and you're having to defend your presence in their office. It's ridiculous. It is not the situation that you want to enter. How do you avoid that, though? Because it's not like you can force someone to do their homework. You can't force someone to do their due diligence. But you actually can do some things to stack the deck. And that is what Robert Cialdini taught me. He developed something that I just call the email strategy. And it goes something like this. I want to pass this tip on to you. If you are going to be meeting with someone for the first time, what you can do a couple of days before the meeting is you send them an email. And in this email, you title it something very relevant, like in advance of Thursday's meeting, so that they are very likely to read it, right? And in the email, you say to them, hi, Chuck, I'm really looking forward to our meeting on Thursday. In advance of our meeting, and here's the magic words, in order to make it as efficient and productive as possible, who can turn that down, right? In order to make it as efficient and productive as possible, I wanted to share with you in advance some information about me and my background as regards whatever topic you're going to discuss. And then, short, right, very brief, in a paragraph, you just explain your credentials, your background, your experience. You say, really looking forward to our conversation, see you Thursday. The email is short enough that they are almost certain to read it. You're not sending an attachment, it's right in the body, they're gonna read it. And it gives them at least enough information so that they know who the heck you are and why you're there. And part of why this is so remarkably effective is that the research that Robert Cialdini has done shows that for whatever reason, this is a quirk of human psychology, but it turns out that when we're talking about self-promotion here, people receive information that you say about yourself very differently than they receive information that you write about yourself. If you say, oh, hi, I'm Dorie, let me tell you about all my credentials and all my awards and all the ways I'm amazing, you're going to probably think I'm bragging. You're going to probably think, oh, this person's really insufferable, even if you asked me to say that. On the other hand, if I write that information, and especially if I send it to you under the premise that we are trying to just make the meeting faster, make the meeting more efficient, it is received, research shows, wildly differently. People see it, they appreciate it, they say, oh, this person's legit, this person's serious. I'm really looking forward to the meeting now. So it's a small life hack. It's a small thing you can do, but it begins to shift the balance of power so that you don't have to be on the defensive. You don't have to be on your heels saying, oh, please, please let me meet with you. So it's one tactic that you can consider. Let me share another. I always try to have a Top Gun slide. It's one of my fundamental principles. But this also connects to some research done, not just by Robert Cialdini, but also by his fantastic colleague, Jeffrey Pfeffer of the Stanford Graduate School of Business. They did some further research into questions of personal branding, And they discovered another interesting little quirk about human nature and self-promotion that we can exploit. And that is, again, as we said before, if I am telling you, if I am verbally telling you all the ways I'm amazing, blah, 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 you are going to tune it out really fast. You are not going to listen, blah, blah, Dorie's boring, etc. But if someone else says those exact same things about me, you're going to think I'm really cool. That's why I had Debbie introduce me. No, sometimes this happens by accident, right? Sometimes just somebody unsolicited will come up and they'll say to your boss or your colleagues, your client, they'll be like, oh, you know, she's so amazing, she's so great, you're so lucky to have her. That is fantastic when that happens. But what the research of Cialdini and Pfeffer points to is that there is actually something that we can do to hasten the process. And that is that we proactively can make this happen by getting a wingman. Here's how you do it, very simple. You identify a friend or colleague, you have to really like them and trust them. This has to be someone that you would not hesitate to recommend yourself, because that is part of the bargain. But you find this like-minded friend or colleague and you go to them and you say, hey, at the next meeting, at the next cocktail party, at the next How Design Live conference, let's make a pact. I will talk you up if you talk me up. Super simple. This is especially good if you are somebody that feels a little nervous about self-promotion. If that's not your favorite thing in the world, guess what? You have outsourced it so that a trusted person can do it for you. And you do it for them. It's a way that you can support your friends and you both win in the end, because people are far more likely to be receptive to your message and to want to get to know you after hearing these things about you. Now, what else? What else can we learn from the annals of research psychology that could be helpful to us in building our influence inside and outside our organizations? I wanted to draw your attention to some research done by a gentleman named Ronald Burt at the University of Chicago. Ron Burt is an expert in what is known as network theory. And fundamentally, this is the study of how to become indispensable to your network. That's kind of an interesting topic, and one that I think is probably relevant to almost all of us. What would it mean if we could become truly indispensable inside our organizations or inside our industry? What would that be? Well, Ron Burt has studied thousands and tens of thousands of people and their social interactions and their social contacts and connections so that he could learn what it actually takes. And what he discovered was actually pretty interesting. If you want to become indispensable to your network, there is one clear mandate above all, and that is that you need to be a lot more like this person at the center of the network and a lot less like this person. Now, for most people, because we're busy, we get tired, it's easier to do the same thing all the time, we often fall into patterns. We often fall into ruts where we do get like this person. Maybe we talk to one person at work, or maybe two people. We're not building bridges, we're not interacting, we're doing the same thing over and over. It becomes rote, you're phoning it in. It might be okay, it might be sufficient, at least sometimes, but it's not making yourself indispensable. If you want to be indispensable, you need to be the person at the center who is connected to lots of people, having access to lots of information. Indispensability, fundamentally, is about overcoming the natural tendency for silos to emerge in networks. If you can be the person that is connecting unlikely people, connecting unlikely sources, that makes you uniquely valuable because you are able to become aware of new ideas, best practices, things that have been tried and worked that should be replicated, things that have been tried and didn't work and should absolutely be avoided. All of a sudden, you know this. You have access to that information because you are talking to people that no one else is. When you bring that information back home, You distinguish yourself. You have access not just to learning the best ideas, but also, frankly, to spreading your own ideas. You are building ambassadors. And there are simple ways. It might sound abstract. There are simple ways to do this. I had one friend. She actually lived here in Boston. She worked at a big research hospital here. She decided she didn't have a lot of time for networking, but there's one thing she could do. She said she would spend 1 hour a week networking. And the way she would do it is she would invite a different person from a different department out to lunch once a week. That's pretty easy, right? It's not a heavy lift to do that. But if you can imagine the impact that it would make for you over the course of a year to have 50 new connections, either spread throughout your organization if you're in-house, or if you're a freelancer or a consultant, spread throughout your community, throughout your industry, you are going to be connecting with so many people, having so many more connections. You know who to call if there's a problem and you need help. You know who to call if you're stuck on something and need a breakthrough. These things can actually reshape your future. Now, it might sound a little scary because I know Susan Cain is one of the speakers here, right? There's a lot of introverts in the house. I know. And I know this partly because I'm an introvert, right? And I want to flag this. This is the asterisk, right? Susan Cain will tell you all about this, I'm sure, or has told you all about it. But people sometimes say, oh, well, you're on stage, you're speaking, you can't be an introvert. Not true. There is a difference between shyness, which is about, people fearing being up on stage or being in the spotlight, and introversion. Two different things. I am happy to be on stage. I just will need to hide afterwards. So, totally different. But so it might sound to you guys like, all right, Dorie, okay, well, network, build the bridges, whatever. That's great if you're an extrovert, but not for me. I'm an introvert. And I want to just push back. I want to push back just gently and lovingly on that a little bit. Because as an introvert, number one, I feel you. Number two, I have some hard-fought advice that I wanted to share with you, which is when we think about a networking event, right, we often picture the same kind of thing. It's sort of the universal platonic ideal. Oh, a networking event. That's some kind of 500-person cocktail party where you wander in and you don't know anyone and you're just handing out business cards and it's kind of loud and kind of horrible, right? That's kind of what's in most people's minds when they think, oh, let's network. Let's go to a networking event. I understand. I don't go to those either anymore. It's a lot. What I have discovered is that if you don't like that kind of networking event, no worries, no problem. But that is not an excuse to opt out of building your network. I think we probably all rationally know that connecting with other humans is important for our professional success, right? That's how we get jobs, that's how we get clients, that's how we get assignments, that's how we get ideas, that's how we get friends, right? All the things come from connections with other people. We don't have to build them that way. That is an artificial way to do it. If you like those events, God bless you, do it, that's amazing. But I don't, and I have discovered ways to work around it, to hack the system. And it starts with understanding what you actually do like in the circumstances where you are at your best. And in my case, what I discovered was that I liked smaller groups. I liked more intimate groups. I liked things where they were not loud. And so I moved to New York, as Debbie mentioned, about 4 years ago, actually from here in Boston. I moved down to New York, and all of a sudden, I discovered, to my horror, my social calendar was kind of empty because I didn't really have any friends in New York. I needed to kind of fix that. And so I started having dinner gatherings. Now, I am not a great cook, so I did them at restaurants, not at my house. That was okay. You can see this is one of them here. I would have them at a Mexican restaurant, and I would just invite small groups of friends. And over the course of 4 years, this is how I have built my social network in New York. You have one of these once a month. I mean, it's pretty light lifting, frankly, if you're doing it at a restaurant. But it's a way of connecting with people where a certain percentage of them are going to become good friends, or they're going to become business colleagues. They're going to become friends with each other, and guess what? You get the credit for it. It doesn't matter. You could have an amazing backyard and invite people for your barbecues. You could be a big basketball player and invite people for pickup games. You might have a sailboat and invite people to sail. Whatever your thing is, you can do it. But we can't opt out of building our network. That's the most important thing, because it's not just about the idea. It's about spreading the idea. We can find our own way. And so the question for you, again, it's a smorgasbord, right? You don't have to do all of these things. It might feel like, oh, there's so many things. What do I do? It feels overwhelming. What I will say is pick one. Is there one story? Is there one anecdote? Is there one tip that speaks to you, that has stayed with you, that you feel like you could do? If there is, I will challenge you to think about implementing it in the next few days, the next week, even today, some of it. I hope everyone's going to be croissanting. And if we do that, it can move the needle forward. We don't need to do everything. We just need to do something. So one last thought that I wanted to share with you guys is about luck. And we might say, well, what does luck have to do with it? That's kind of a strange note to end on, given that luck, of course, is kind of the definition of the thing that we can't control. Luck is just something that happens to us. Well, that was what I used to think too, until I met this gentleman. His name is Tony Chan. He lives here in Boston too. You can see I like to personalize my talks, so you get my Boston talk. So right here, not far at all, his offices are in Faneuil Hall. Tony is a venture capitalist here in Boston, and he wrote a book a few years ago called Hearts, Smarts, Guts, and Luck. And in it, he and his colleagues did an exhaustive study of entrepreneurs to discover what makes the most successful leaders tick. What's their secret? And he discovered some things that you would probably appreciate, understand. Some are heart-driven. They're so passionate, people just have to follow them. Some are smarts-driven. They're brainiacs. They outthink everyone. Some are guts-driven. They are brassy. They have chutzpah. They never give up. All this makes plenty of sense as a leader. Fantastic. What intrigued me were the luck-driven leaders. What does that mean, to be a luck-driven leader? But what Tony discovered is that the luck-driven leaders, they were lucky because of things that were actually eminently replicable. The luck-driven leaders had two qualities that all of us already have and can cultivate more of: curiosity and humility. That was the secret sauce. Because if you are curious, you're willing to talk to almost anyone, to learn from almost anyone. You're the person who's willing to talk to the wallflower over in the corner who's standing by himself. You're the person who's willing to start a chat with the Uber driver or the bartender or the person here at the conference who looks a little lost and like they don't fit in. And coupled with it intimately is humility. Because when you're humble enough to realize that you have something to learn from everyone, it enables you to be open to new people and new ideas that can potentially make all the difference for you. As a creative professional, you know that you're in it to make change. You're creating something new. You want to have an impact. It's not just about having the idea, it's about spreading the idea. And it's my hope that some of the ideas that I have shared with you today might be things that you can take up and apply and may make a difference for you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dorie. That was incredible, and I know that all of us will take something away from that. So appreciate it. Thank you. Please head out to your breakout sessions, and we will meet back here shortly.